Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about how good compensation committee chairmen can result in great compensation committees. And joining me is somebody that knows a little bit about that. Please welcome Jim Wolf, who's a managing partner for Meridian Compensation Partners. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, TK. Great to be here.
Well, it's especially nice to have you here because I found out in the rumor mill that you are sort of winding down in what somebody my age would call early retirement, okay, from Meridian. But that's earned after 25 plus years in the executive comp space and hundreds of executive or comp meetings or compensation committee board meetings. So we'll let you retire knowing that that's the kind of experience you have. And also, it's my pleasure to have you on because I want to tap all those years of experience before we have you move on to your next challenge. So with that, let me ask you this. So knowing you've been in all those compensation committee meetings and you work closely as any comp consultant would with the chair of the committee, what would you say, looking back, is the most important skill set, sort of characteristic or career experience that you have found is important for a chair of the comp committee?
Great question. And yes, I've had the privilege of working with a number of excellent compensation committee chairmen over the years. And the interesting thing is they come from all walks of life, all backgrounds. There isn't a specific, profession or job that they needed to have in order to be a great compensation committee chair. But I would say a couple of building blocks there. One, certainly if they understand the components and the processes around executive compensation, the various pieces of it, and how they work. And if they've had exposure to more than just one type of program. So they've got a sense of the range of possibilities of reasonable outcomes for how to put those pieces together. That's certainly a great start. But if I had to kind of pick one trait, TK, that really sort of sets apart the great ones, it's really an interpersonal skill. It's being a great communicator. And being able to connect with people, listen well, understand the perspectives of the other committee chair or the committee people around the table, but also spend time with management and understand those constituents and realize that compensation is a lot more than just a number. It really is about the messages tied to that number and the process for reaching those conclusions, and understanding what are the messages that need to be conveyed and how might those be received. People who have that kind of skill set, I think, tend to be the most successful in the role.
Well, you make it sound like knowing all the pieces to an executive comp thing is sort of standard fare. Truth is, it is not standard fare. I mean, when you look at 162, you look at pay for performance, you look at long-term incentives, short-term incentives. It really takes somebody from a comp chair point to understand all those pieces and how they fit together, and then be able to explain that in a story in a CD&A. So, I mean, again, you sort of pass it off as you have to have that, but those are very few people who come to the board with that knowledge.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the people who do it best have had the experience of working with those components, learning from different ways of putting those components together, understanding all of the technical ins and outs of the financial metrics or the governance rules, the disclosure rules. Those really do help. I mean, there's plenty of technicians typically around and supporting the committee. But having a committee chair who really understands that and has been around the block a few times with those components does help a lot. And I think that sort of sets the committee off on a really strong path.
So Since we're looking back, and so what would you say from your experience is the one sort of common mistake or misstep that comp chairs often make that makes the compensation committee's job a little more challenging?
Well, I'd say the most common mistake is one that a lot of board members face in terms of a potential mistake, and that is sort of becoming the author of the programs, kind of taking the pen and really saying, "Oh, I know exactly what this compensation program should look like," and doing the compensation job, the compensation management job, when in fact, I think committee's responsibility is to set the standards and the parameters and really build the fences that are important from a governance standpoint and a shareholder relations standpoint for those comp programs, but really task management with authoring the programs and really owning the programs in terms of what are the metrics we're going to have in there and how do they align with our strategy? Where should the goals be set? Who's going to participate in what levels of the program? The best programs are ones where management has that authorship. The committee has sort of given them the rules and regulations to stay within. And the chair needs to sort of step aside and say, that's not a program I'm used to. That's not the program I grew up in, but really respecting management to come forth with a strong proposal and then own the program as it runs. That's probably the top sort of balance, or I would call it a mistake, but an error that some chairs can make. I would also say, TK, there's an opportunity that's often missed. And I would kind of articulate it as simple as saying the ability to say no. And it's really more, hopefully the no is said more in the development of a proposal before it gets to the committee meeting. But as management is coming up with authorship and coming up with programs, to say early in the process as the chair, I hear where you're going with that. I understand what you're trying to do, but I don't think the committee is going to go for that, or I don't think our investors, that's not responsive to our investors. Why don't you go back to the drawing board a little bit on these specific aspects? A committee chair, it's really important that a committee chair do that in the development process of the recommendations.
Us living in this board space for the last 27, 28 years, we have seen unbelievable change with the comp committee. Okay. In the old days, it used to be just the audit committee that was complex, that people had to think about whether they wanted to serve on. It didn't have, it had all the focus on it, Well, then comes say on pay, and then comes pay for performance, and then comes, Dodd-Frank. And then, now we have ESG. Okay. And all of a sudden, the focus on compensation committees has been at least equal to that of audit committees, and also the complexity of it. So, now people are thinking, are having to think about their responsibilities on whichever committee, they take. So when you look back over your years, what sort of it, knowing that that's the case, knowing that it's not getting easier, knowing that even this year, say on pay has been challenged maybe more than the last couple of years, what advice, what fatherly advice would you offer at this point, Jim, in the way of helping compensation committees be more effective going forward?
Sure. Well, yeah. Boy, TK, you and I have been having these conversations for a long time. And absolutely, the environment has changed so much during that period. The role of the compensation committee has changed so much, and certainly the role of the chair has changed a lot. I think, 20 years ago, post Enron, most comp committees that we sat with, the people just said, I'm great being on comp, just don't put me on audit. They're not having fun over there. But that has changed. The heat and the dynamics and the publicity the rules, the investor conversations, and the investor engagement around compensation is still somewhat new and evolving. And I think maybe one of the top pieces of advice I could offer is that this just gets to the core role of being a board member, meaning we're here to represent shareholders. And so understanding how each company's shareholders view compensation is an important input and a perspective to have in mind. I would add there's a balance here, though, in that the board also, their top job is to select and monitor the CEO. And in that role, most boards want to support the CEO in any way they can. And sometimes the compensation conversations can get a little difficult. Sometimes it does involve saying no or pushing back on some things. But understanding, hey, I want to make it evident that I'm here to support management and what they're trying to do, while still serving the needs of the investors that I represent. That balance, and always asking, am I current with that? I mean, am I in tune with all those stakeholders? Is sort of, to me, the core of being a great compensation committee member and certainly a comp chair.
Jim, I'm sure there are a bunch of high-profile companies and comp committees that are thanking you for your expertise and your service over the years. I was wondering if it might be appropriate for me to ask, knowing again that I call it a early retirement, what is the next challenge for Jim Wolf going forward?
Well, TK, I appreciate you asking. In terms of the early aspect of it, I do like to say I'm in the fairway of retirement ages. But no, I've learned a lot about watching people go through this transition, and it's all about redefining my purpose along all fronts, so family and community. But, I think being able to borrow from everything I've had the privilege of learning, the many, many different boards I've had the privilege of serving, and the things I've had the opportunity to learn from all that, it'd be great to serve on a board and one that fits sort of what I bring to the table. So certainly I'm interested in that, but otherwise just sort of staying close to that part of the business, continuing to watch your show and learning from that. Those are the things I'm planning on doing.
Well, it's interesting that I have gotten on my soapbox more than just a few times about how important committee chairs are to the success of a board and how much responsibility they take on their shoulders. And you and I just talked about how important it is to know compensation. So I would think that if that's your interest on serving on a board, that there should be plenty of boards out there, Jim, that could really benefit from somebody that's had the experience that you did with comp committees, in addition to your business acumen and experience. So I only see, good things happening once the word's out that that's your interest, because you could certainly help a board and comp committee.
Well, TK, I appreciate you saying all that. So we'll see what the future holds, but I look forward to it.
I want to thank you for taking the time. Good luck in the future. And Jim, take care.
We'll definitely be in touch. Thanks, TK.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.